إعلان مهم.
重要提示
Important announcement.
Message important.
Важное объявление.
Annuncio importante.
يرجى من المتحدثين الكرام إلقاء بياناتهم بسرعة معقولة لضمان ترجمة فورية وافية وعالية الجودة.
为了帮助口译准确完整传递发言信息，请代表发言时语速不要过快。
Speakers are kindly reminded to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace to ensure complete and quality interpretation.
Il est rappelé aux orateurs qu'ils doivent présenter leur déclaration à un rythme raisonnable afin de garantir une interprétation complète et de qualité.
Напоминаем ораторам, что для того, чтобы устный перевод был полным и качественным, необходимо выступать в умеренном темпе.
Se ruega a los oradores que pronuncien sus declaraciones a un ritmo razonable para garantizar una interpretación íntegra y de calidad.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, I hereby declare open the third meeting of the 62nd session of the Human Rights Council. We shall now continue the interactive dialogue with the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel, pursuant to Council Resolution S30/1. I now invite interested delegations to ask questions and to make comments on the report. The speaking time is 1 minute 30 seconds for all. It's a long list. Please keep to time. I will also assist along the way. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Venezuela on behalf of a group of countries.
Venezuela is making this statement on behalf of the Group of Friends in the Defence of the UN Charter. The group would like to thank the COI for submitting their report, and we take note with concern of its findings on the escalating attacks of settlers against the Palestinian people in the OPT, including East Jerusalem. The conclusions of this commission show that settler violence continues contributing to the illegal displacement of Palestinians, consolidating the illegal presence of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory. The persistence of these attacks, together with a prevailing climate of impunity, is undermining the rights of Palestinian people, including their right to self-determination. We would urge all states to comply with their obligations as part of international law. We'd underscore the importance of accountability and restate our support to the mandate of the Commission of Inquiry. Finally, the Group of Friends in Defence of the UN Charter would repeat its appeal for a sovereign and viable Palestinian state based on the pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, in line with international law and the relevant resolutions of the United Nations, on the basis of a two-state solution guaranteeing right to return also of Palestinian refugees. Many thanks.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union.
Mr. President, the European Union thanks the Commission of Inquiry for the presentation and takes note of the report. We reiterate the need for Israel and all countries to cooperate with the Human Rights Council mechanism and respect their mandates and independence. The EU recalls its support for the Commission of Inquiry. All sides are bound by international law, and Israel has the obligation to protect the population under occupation. The EU rejects any attempt at demographic or territorial changes and supports unifying Gaza with the West Bank under the PA. We oppose any forced displacement of the Palestinian population. We reiterate the need for the full implementation of the ceasefire and all provisions of UN Security Council Resolution 2803. The EU recalls its condemnation of Hamas. We stress the need for the immediate removal of all humanitarian assistance restrictions in Gaza and recall the need to implement the ICJ orders, which are legally binding. The EU strongly condemns the increased settler violence in the West Bank and calls on Israel to reverse the E1 settlement plan. We also strongly condemn terrorist attacks against Israel. The EU is deeply concerned by the adoption of the death penalty bill by the Israeli parliament and its de facto discriminatory character. We call on Israel to reverse the NGO registration law. The EU remains firmly committed to the two-state solution. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the OIC Group. The Group welcomes the Commission and thanks it for the presentation of its report. We condemn in the strongest terms the sharp rise in attacks on the Palestinian people and their property in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, including terrorist Israeli settlers are actively supported by the occupation authorities to advance the illegal settler colonial enterprise. These attacks have taken place in tandem with occupation forces' military assaults on refugee camps in the illegally occupied Palestinian territory and the mass expulsion of tens of thousands of Palestinians. In the besieged Gaza Strip, the occupation authorities have funded and armed militias to further terrorize the people and attack humanitarian relief convoys and personnel. This dangerous phenomenon also merits the Commission's attention. Taken together, the actions of the illegal occupying power and its terrorist settlers amount to ethnic cleansing and represent a continuation of the genocide of the Palestinian people. Israel's unlawful occupation of the Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, remains the root cause of the grave and worsening plight of the Palestinian people. We condemn the illegal occupying power's efforts to dodge accountability for its crimes and assure the Commission of the OIC Group's abiding support in the full discharge of its mandate. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sudan on behalf of a group of Arab states.
Thank you, Mr. President. I speak on behalf of the Arab group. We welcome the report of the COI, and we reaffirm the importance of looking into the conclusions of the report in the legal and comprehensive framework. We condemn Israel's, the occupying power continuation of refusal of cooperation with the human rights mechanisms. The report shows a grave escalation of the systematic terror against the Palestinian people by armed settler militias. These cannot be considered individual or isolated incidents. They are part of a systematic approach to entrench the colonial project and to continue using violence and terror and displacement to impose an illegal de facto situation on the ground. The Arab group expresses its grave concern at the targeting of Palestinian civilians, including sexual violence and targeting of whole communities, the continuation of the impunity of the settlers, and the protection they receive by the occupying power has allowed for the continuation of these crimes that cannot be separated from the genocide and the crimes perpetrated against the Palestinian people in Gaza. We reaffirm the illegality of settlement, and we call for accountability and to work on allowing the Palestinian people to exercise the right of self-determination. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Colombia on behalf of a group of countries.
I'm making this statement on behalf of the Hague Group, and the English version of this text is in the system. Despite the declared ceasefire in Gaza, Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people continues across the occupied Palestinian territory. As the report by the Commission of Inquiry details, the rise of killings and bodily harm against the Palestinian people, the need for ensuring accountability is more pressing than ever. Escalating settler violence is integral to Israel's state policy of annexation, settler colonialism, apartheid, and genocide. Israeli authorities encourage settler violence. The military provides protection, and the government passes laws that result in de facto annexation of the West Bank, applying the death penalty to Palestinians only, which is a clear breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Israel must immediately end this violence, harassment, and intimidation. It must finalize its unlawful occupation and stop obstructing the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. The Hague Group invites states to our ministerial conference in July to secure decisive measures to protect the Palestinian people and calls for compliance with international law, including the ICJ's advisory opinions and provisional measures, international human rights and humanitarian law measures, as well as to support the Commission of Inquiry, including through the exercise of universal jurisdiction in accordance with national laws and international obligations. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the NAM.
President, the movement thanks the Commission of Inquiry for its report and takes note with serious concern of the findings regarding the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. The movement remains deeply concerned by the continued expansion of illegal Israeli settlements and the escalating terror and violence inflicted by the Israeli settler militias against Palestinian civilians throughout the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Operating with the protection of the occupying forces and encouraged by the support and incitement of the far-right Israeli government, these militias have become an instrument of Israel's settler colonial enterprise, aimed at terrorizing Palestinian communities, forcibly displacing them from their land, fragmenting Palestinian territory, and entrenching Israel's unlawful occupation in violation of the Palestinian people's inalienable right to self-determination. The NAM reiterates its firm support for the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, including their right to an independent state of Palestine. The movement further reiterates the importance of implementing the advisory opinion of the ICJ of 19 July 2024 and recalls the obligations arising therefrom, including the obligation not to recognize, aid, or assist the unlawful situation created by Israel's continued unlawful presence in the OPT. The NAM stresses the importance of ensuring accountability and remain committed with the Palestinian people. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya on behalf of the African Group.
Mr. President, the African Group thanks the Commission for its report and expresses deep concern over the continued violations against the Palestinian people, including repeated violations of the ceasefire in Gaza and the ongoing illegal measures in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and the continued expansion of illegal settlements and increasing settler violence. The African Group denounces Israeli colonial policies and unequivocally rejects any attempt to liquidate the Palestinian cause, including any form of forced displacement of Palestinians in violation of international law, and expresses concern over the continued displacement associated with settlement expansion and settler violence. The group calls for the full implementation of the Gaza peace agreement in all its phases and reiterates the imperative to address the root causes of the conflict, the foremost end of Israeli occupation and the cessation of settlement activities and all forms of collective punishment against the Palestinian people. Stemming from its common values and principles that stand firmly against colonialism, oppression, and apartheid, the group reaffirms the centrality of the just cause of the Palestinian in unwavering support for the Palestinian people in their historic struggle to realize their right to self-determination and establish the independent state on the June 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. In conclusion, we underscore that the just resolution of the Palestinian question remains essential to achieving a more comprehensive and lasting peace in the Middle East on the basis of a two-state solution, and the full statement shall be uploaded on the extranet. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain on behalf of a group of countries.
Gracias, señor presidente. Thank you, President. It's an honor to deliver this statement on behalf of Palestine, Spain, and a group of 77 different regional countries. The treatment of Palestinian prisoners and Palestinian detainees in the OPT violates international human rights law. We're deeply concerned at the reports of numerous UN mechanisms, including the COA and humanitarian actors, that denounce arbitrary and administrative detention without charge, denial of due process guarantees, torture, ill treatment, sexual violence, restriction on access to medical care and legal representation. We urge Israel, the occupying power, to comply with its obligations under international law, ensure regular access to the ICRC, families of Palestinian prisoners and detainees, revise its detentions laws and practices, and constructively engage with the UN and humanitarian actors. We are alarmed by the adoption of new legislation on the death penalty. These measures have a disproportionate impact on women, children, and persons in vulnerable situations who are deprived of liberty. This Council, its mechanisms, must stand ready to condemn and contribute to accountability for these human rights violations. Let's recall that all parties are bound by international human rights law and international humanitarian law, including the absolute prohibition of torture. There needs to be full respect for rights and dignity of Palestinian prisoners and detainees, as well as independent monitoring of detention conditions. Many thanks.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bahrain on behalf of the GCC.
Thank you, Mr. President. The GCC thank the Commission of Inquiry for the report. We express our concern at the grave escalation of the settler attacks against Palestinians in the OPT, including East Jerusalem. These practices are linked to the settler policies by the occupying power. We condemn the continuation of settlements, the confiscation of land, the escalation of the acts of the settlers, including terror, destruction of property, agricultural land, etc. These practices are a grave violation of international humanitarian law and human rights law, and they undermine any chance of sustainable peace. We refuse all measures that aim at changing the demographic and territorial changes in the OPT. We we ask the international community to make sure there is accountability. Our stance is firm in solidarity with the Palestinian people, especially the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and to establishing a sovereign state within the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as the capital. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, President. Australia is committed to the two-state solution as the only way to guarantee peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians. We must not lose sight of the ongoing devastation in Gaza. We continue to call for the full implementation of the Gaza Peace Plan, sustained and unimpeded humanitarian assistance and compliance with international humanitarian law. In the West Bank, the situation continues to deteriorate. Together with our partners, we call on Israel to cease its illegal settlement activity, which threatens the very viability of a two-state solution. We strongly condemn ongoing settler violence and have coordinated with partners to sanction extremist settlers and entities responsible for violence and human rights abuses against Palestinians. Israel must hold perpetrators to account. We remain unequivocal in our condemnation of Hamas and have recently joined partners in sanctioning Hamas individuals and entities for their ongoing acts of violence. Chair, how can we achieve a two-state solution in the face of actions that risk fuelling further violence and instability?
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain.
Señor Presidente.
Thank you, President. Spain joins with the statement made by the EU. We'd like to thank the Commission of Inquiry for its report, and we support their work as well as the OHCHR. We'd underscore the fact that arbitrary arrest, torture, denial of access to medicines and legal representation violate fundamental rights of Palestinian prisoners in the occupied Palestinian territory. They are very serious violations of international humanitarian law. We also denounce the systemic violence of settlers and the Israeli security forces in the occupied Palestinian territories. Murders, abuse, destruction of homes cannot simply be the everyday life of people in the West Bank, nor can we stand by impassive given the new Israeli legislation in the area of the death penalty. It eliminates basic procedural guarantees for a fair trial, and it affects disproportionately the Palestinian people. There are also the unacceptable attacks on the physical integrity and ill treatment inflicted on the members of the Global Summit Flotilla, a peaceful humanitarian initiative. We would urge Israel to ensure unhindered access in Gaza to humanitarian agencies so that there is strict compliance with international human rights law and human rights law. We also would like to say that we support a viable Palestinian state legally recognized. It is a two-state solution that is the only way forward for definitive peace in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iceland.
Mr. President, the Commission's latest report documents serious and flagrant violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law within its mandate. Iceland condemns the continued expansion of the illegal Israeli settlement activities and the escalating violence perpetrated by settlers against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, including against Palestinian children. Respect for international law is not optional. Those responsible for these violations must be held accountable, and impunity for these crimes must end. The report also highlights brutal violence committed by armed Palestinian groups against civilians in Israel and Palestine, including war crimes and serious violations of international law. Iceland also condemns these crimes. Attacks against civilians, hostage-taking, torture, sexual and gender-based violence, and the obstruction of humanitarian assistance, regardless of the perpetrator, can never be justified. Iceland emphasizes Israel's obligation as the occupying power to protect Palestinian civilians by putting an end to settler violence and ensuring that humanitarian assistance reaches those in need without obstruction, including in Gaza, where the situation remains unacceptable. Iceland reiterates its support for a just and lasting peace based on a two-state solution. A credible pathway for peace can only be attained through a fully respected ceasefire and an end to the occupation. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Mr. President, my delegation warmly welcomes the Commission of Inquiry and thanks them for the presentation of their findings, which my delegation has noted. Violent attacks, harassment and discrimination by armed settlers with the full backing of the Israeli occupation forces are consistent features of settler colonialism in the OPT, as noted also by the Commission. Pakistan is gravely concerned at the sharp escalation in violence, home demolitions, forced expulsions, arbitrary detentions and torture against Palestinian people throughout the OPT. This alarming pattern is intended to facilitate the expansion of illegal Israeli settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, as well as the occupation forces' siege of the Gaza Strip. Mr. President, a delicate regional situation consumes our focus, but the world cannot afford to neglect the untenable situation in the OPT, including East Jerusalem. Decades of illegal occupation and unrestrained use of force in contravention of international law, including international humanitarian law, have compounded the dehumanization and dispossession of the Palestinian people. Israeli occupation forces and settlers are attempting to extinguish the two-state solution, but a just and lasting peace requires the exercise of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and statehood based on pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. يود وفد بلادي.
Many thanks. My delegation would like to endorse what has been said by the group to which we belong. We've taken note of the report. We commend the role of the COI when it comes to documenting the violations committed, particularly the excessive use of force and the suffocating blockade, as well as the destruction of homes and deliberate operations to destroy educational facilities. And we also want to restate our position of principle to support the Palestinian cause. We denounce those violations created by those responsible for the occupying powers and the extremist settlers, particularly storming the blessed Al-Aqsa Mosque and raising the occupation forces flag there. This is an escalation which shows what the intent is in the region. It threatens peace and stability. It is a clear violation. We're talking about violating the holy places of Islam and the legal status and historic status in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And we contest any attempt to change demography here. We urge the international community to put an end to these violations and ensure that the Palestinian people can enjoy their inalienable rights, namely establishing an independent state on the 4th of June 1967 boundaries with East Jerusalem as its capital, and also being a fully fledged member within the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland.
President, thank you. President, Ireland aligns with the EU statement and thanks the Commission for its report. President, Ireland is deeply concerned by the Commission's findings that an already well-established pattern of settler violence against Palestinian civilians has intensified sharply since October 2023. The increase in settler violence against Palestinian children, including physical violence and abductions, is particularly disturbing. Ireland is further concerned by the atmosphere of impunity in which settler violence continues. Accountability for violence perpetrated by settlers against Palestinians, including fatal violence, is gravely deficient, with 96% of incidents not leading to prosecution. The Commission's finding that the IDF, quote, routinely accompanies settlers in attacks, unquote, further enables non-state actors to attack Palestinians. As the occupying power, Israel is obliged to protect and safeguard the population under its occupation. President, Ireland condemns and calls for the immediate cessation of all extrajudicial violence, including torture, murder and summary executions of civilians by Hamas and other groups. These unlawful actions violate the human rights of Palestinians. Ireland condemns the expansion of the Israeli law on the death penalty, including its discriminatory nature as it relates to Palestinians, and urges Israel to withdraw it. Ireland is deeply concerned about the Commission's findings regarding gender-based violence, including rape. Members of the Commission, what steps can states take to ensure accountability for settler violence and for violence by Hamas? Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of France.
Merci. Thank you, President. I'd like to thank the Commission of Inquiry for submitting the report. It testifies to the continued serious violations of international humanitarian law and international rights law. The living conditions of civilians, Palestinian civilians, continue to get worse. France restates the fact that all parties must respect fully international humanitarian law. Civilians can never be targets. They have to be protected, always. Alongside other states, France has publicly expressed on the 8th of June its concerns given the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza. We've also called on Israel to guarantee humanitarian access, including for NGOs. For the Palestinians of Gaza, massive, rapid and unimpeded entry of humanitarian aid is an absolute urgency. UN agencies, including UNRWA, the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement and NGOs must be able to do their work without imperiling their lives. This also means we need to have an end to the strikes from Hamas as well as its disarmament. In the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, the acceleration of settlers and forced displacement may lead to a de facto annexing of these territories. The E1 project is very worrying and must not come to fruition. The attacks of settlers against Palestinian civilians are multiplied in all impunity. France would years ago call on Israel to respect its international obligations to protect the Palestinian people and sanction those people responsible for attacks. A year after the Paris call, France has restated its constant commitment for a fair and lasting peace. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Luxembourg.
Monsieur le Président, le Luxembourg.
President, Luxembourg aligns itself with a statement made by the European Union. We thank the Commission of Inquiry for its work. It is with great concern that we are observing developments in the occupied Palestinian territories that are continuously leading to full annexation by Israel. We deplore the adoption of a law that authorizes from now on Israelis to acquire territories in occupied left bank, and that will continue the civil control by the military of the Palestinian territory. This control is continued to carry on, and we see that there continued violence by security forces, and they are protected from judicial proceedings. The lack of a fair trial creates a climate of impunity and the erosion of the rule of law. We condemn also the violent acts committed by Hamas and other armed Palestinian groups. Violence cannot justify more levels of violence, and this vicious circle should be broken immediately. Finally, 2 weeks before the 9th Congress on the death penalty, the adoption of a new law introducing selective death penalty targeting specifically the Palestinian population is to us particularly shocking because of this clear discriminatory nature. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Mr. President, exposing atrocities and speaking truth to power demands courage and moral clarity. We applaud the principal example of those who stand firmly against the genocide in Gaza, and the same clarity must guide this Council. We strongly condemn the settler violence in the OPT, which is a clear manifestation of religious violent extremism perpetrated by Israelis, threatening regional and international peace and security. Commissioners, are the principles of preventing and countering violent extremism, including addressing incitement, dismantling networks that organize and finance violence, ensuring accountability, and protecting all civilians equally applicable here? Please explain. Also, how should we address Israel's two-tier legal system in the occupied West Bank, which blatantly violates Palestinian rights while allowing the extremist Israeli settlers to enjoy immunity, and what must be done to end it? Reports from the UNICEF and human rights group describe it as the only country with a systemic military court and detention system that prosecutes children primarily in the West Bank. In that regard, how can your mandate strengthen international accountability efforts to dismantle the systematic discrimination perpetuated by Israel's apartheid dual-like court system? Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. السيد الرئيس إن الشعب الفلسطيني.
Thank you very much, President. President, the Palestinian people are dying twice a day as a result of systematic attacks on Gaza and occupied Jerusalem, with the acceleration of a campaign of forced displacement and colonial activities. And the second death is a result of the fact that the international community is forgetting about its cause. We are raising the alarm related to this double tragedy of the Palestinian people. We believe that peace, security, and stability in the Middle East is directly related to the resolution of the Palestinian question in a just and sustainable manner. We express our solidarity with the Palestinian people and support the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to establish of its sovereign state with East Jerusalem, Quds Sharif as a capital. We express solidarity with all states that are victims of the latest wave of escalation. Sister country Lebanon deserves that the international community gives it full support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. يرحب وفد جمهورية.
Thank you very much, President. The delegation of my country would like to welcome the International Independent Commission of Inquiry, and we support the mandate of this commission to promote accountability, put an end to impunity. Iraq strongly condemns the crimes of genocide and crimes against humanity committed by the occupying force against the people of Palestine, representing a serious violation of the rules of IHL and international human rights law. We condemn the support that is given to the colonizers that violate the integrity of the Palestinian population and also attempts to expand the colonial activities by occupying more and more territory. We demand urgent international measures to stop using famine as a weapon of war and to remove obstacles to humanitarian assistance and ensure the protection of civilians, especially women and children. Finally, Iraq strongly condemns the adoption by the so-called Knesset of Israel, the law related to the execution of Palestinian prisoners in jails. This is a crime of genocide committed in Palestine, and this is also an escalation that further exacerbates the suffering of Palestinian people and continues policies of impunity. We should work together to put an end to the illegal occupation of Palestinian territories. We support the Palestinian state and the exercise of sovereignty by the Palestinian government throughout its territory, including with its capital in East Jerusalem, based on the principle of autodetermination.
Representative of Malaysia.
Mr. President, we thank the Commission of Inquiry for its report, documenting violations in the OPT under challenging circumstances. Malaysia unequivocally condemns the continued violence perpetrated by Israel settlers against innocent Palestinians. These are not isolated incidents. It is a blatant and unconscionable land grab, a decades-long campaign sustained by a culture of impunity, zero accountability, and the support and protection of the genocidal Israel regime. Particularly alarming is the sharp escalation of settler violence in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Within a few short months, 600 settler attacks against innocent Palestinians were recorded. The involvement of Israel's security forces as protectors of settlers demonstrates that settler violence is being used as a state tool to continue the unlawful occupation, entrench the illegal Israel settlements, annex Palestinian territory, and displace Palestinians from their land. The 2024 advisory opinion of the ICJ affirmed Israel's continued presence in the OPT, including East Jerusalem, is illegal. The continued expansion of these illegal settlements entirely derails the prospects for a just and lasting peace. We encourage the Commission to investigate crimes committed by security forces personnel with dual nationality, while urging states to investigate crimes committed by their own dual nationals in line with their national laws and universal jurisdiction.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jordan.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السيد الرئيس نشكر لجنة التحقيق الدولية.
In the name of God, the merciful and compassionate, we'd like to welcome the Independent Commission of the Inquiry for their presentation. We take note of the conclusions taken related to the growing number of acts of violence committed by the colonizers in East Jerusalem and throughout the occupied Palestinian territories. We have a legal obligation to protect human rights throughout and for all citizens. The report documents the practices targeting the Palestinian populations, and the only way to put an end to these practices is to put an end to occupation and the colonial activities and dismantlement of the colonies in line with international law and advisory opinion of the ICJ to make it possible for the Palestinian people to enjoy their rights and establish its independent state in its territory. This report was preceded by a high number of other reports. Unilateral measures and colonial measures undermines any opportunity for the Palestinian people to achieve lasting peace, and we invite the Council to closely monitor the situation in the OPTs to guarantee accountability. We support the legitimate right of the Palestinian people, most notably the right to establish its state with East Jerusalem as its capital.
Thank you. I give the floor to distinguished representative of Canada.
Thank you, Mr. President. Despite the ceasefire, the humanitarian situation in Gaza remains catastrophic. Canada has committed over $500 million in assistance since the start of the current conflict and calls for the unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid. We are horrified by the Commission of Inquiry's findings of at least 249 cases of execution, torture, and violence by Hamas and other groups in Gaza against Palestinians. It is clear that Hamas, a group Canada lists as a terrorist entity, must disarm and play no further role in the governance of Gaza. Further, the October 7th Civil Commission report underscores sexual and gender-based violence by Hamas, including against hostages. Canada is also gravely concerned about reports of torture and ill treatment, including sexual violence against Palestinian detainees. Canada unreservedly condemns such actions and reaffirms that all victims and survivors deserve justice. Israeli settlement expansion, including the E1 plan, and extremist settler violence in the West Bank are unacceptable. Consequently, on June 9th, Canada imposed sanctions targeting individuals and entities linked to Israeli extremist settler violence against Palestinian civilians and their property. We also oppose arguments for annexation and for the forcible displacement of Palestinians. We must redouble efforts towards peace building and a two-state solution where Israelis and Palestinians can live in peace, security, and dignity. To that end, Canada, alongside Australia and the United Kingdom, have launched the first ever peace fund to support peace-building efforts to establish conditions for a lasting peace. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Maldives.
Mr. President, the Maldives thanks the Independent International Commission of Inquiry for its report. The Maldives strongly condemns the ongoing military operations and restrictions on humanitarian assistance imposed on the Palestinian people by the Israeli occupying power. We call on Israel to fully comply with its obligations under international law by ensuring the protection of civilians and civilian objects indispensable to their survival, and by guaranteeing safe, sustained and unhindered humanitarian access. We further call on the international community to hold Israel accountable for its flagrant violations of international law and to put an end to the culture of impunity. We urge decisive action to prevent further displacement and to ensure effective remedies and rehabilitation for affected civilians. We also call for the creation of conditions conducive to a just, lasting and peaceful resolution to the conflict, including respect for the rights of Palestinian people and their right to self-determination. Finally, the government of Maldives reiterates its strong support for ending Israel's illegal occupation of Palestine and reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the realization of an independent and sovereign state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. نشكر لجنة التحقيق على
Thank you very much, President. We thank the International Independent Commission of Inquiry for its report, which documents the continued serious violations against the Palestinian people and highlights the consequences of the occupation and settlements and associated violence, displacement land grabbing, something that undermines human rights and threatens the prospects for peace and stability. The approach by Israel that wishes to impose through force fait accompli is not limited to the OPTs, but is also reflected in the attacks and incursions into Syrian territory and the occupied Syrian Golan, which is the violation of sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria, the Charter of the United Nations, a relevant resolution and disengagement agreement, something that contributes to increased tension and instability in the region. President, we invite the international community to shoulder its responsibility to take effective action to stop Israeli violations, put an end to the occupation, to halt settlement activities and protection to Palestinian people, ensure accountability for documented crimes and violations. We reiterate our solidarity with the Palestinian people in order to achieve their inalienable rights, foremost of which is the right to self-determination, the establishment of their independent state in accordance with the resolutions of the international community. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Senegal.
Thank you very much. Despite the October 2025 Sharm el-Sheikh agreement, the situation the OPTs is of serious concern. In Gaza, where the ceasefire is just a theory, we see numerous civilian victims, civilians seriously impacted by the conflict that no longer can satisfy their basic needs. The cynical practices, for example, the expropriation, the forced displacement of the population, and systematic destruction of civilian infrastructure. Senegal would like to express here its serious concern in the face of these violations that are continuing of the rights of the Palestinian people. In this respect, the unprecedented violence of colonists in the left bank that we condemned, and the continued questioning of the legal status of East Jerusalem is a continued threat to Palestinian people, so we should preserve our determination to defend respect of international law, especially the opinion of the ICJ on the Palestinian-Israeli questions and the relevant resolutions of the UN General Assembly and the United Nations. The right to the self-determination of the Palestinian people, as well as peace and stability in the region, depend on that. Finally, Senegal would like to express its commitment to the two-state solution and would like to encourage the Commission to continue its very crucial work that it's carrying out. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of New Zealand.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the world has focused on the Iran conflict, the situation across occupied Palestinian territories has also deteriorated. We are deeply concerned by the Commission's reports of serious abuses of human rights by non-state actors. This includes a stark increase in killings and injuries by extremist Israeli settlers. These acts of violence in the West Bank occur with impunity. We urge Israel to do all that it can to stop these actions and ensure those responsible are held accountable. We condemn unequivocally the ongoing violence inflicted by Palestinian armed militants associated with Hamas, including in medical facilities, public executions and beatings. The violence stands alongside the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. The level of desperation is striking. 46% of children under 2 experience severe food poverty. In April alone, 3,500 children were admitted to hospital suffering malnutrition. We urge all parties to continue to give effect to UN Security Council Resolution 2803. We urge Israel to allow humanitarian assistance into and throughout Gaza in line with its obligations under international law. Mr. President, what more can the international community do to alleviate the suffering of the people of Gaza and bring an end to the violence?
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Colombia.
Thank you, President. The situation that is documented by the Commission on Inquiries shows that the Israeli authorities ignore the rights of Palestinian people with condemnations. We see that the declaration of ceasefire just became something on paper with limited effects. The chaos continues, and it has an exacerbated effect on Palestinian people through the death penalty, extrajudicial executions or restrictions to the provision of humanitarian aid. Israeli authorities continue their intimidation in the West Bank, promoting extreme violence to ensure de facto control over occupied territories. There are multiple actors that should be held accountable in line with their respective responsibility and in connection with the acts that are done. We urge full respect of international law, including the decisions of the ICJ, to work with the investigations of the ICC and put an end to the transfer of arms and support for the occupation of territories. It is inadmissible that the rights of the Palestinian people are being ignored and international law is being ignored, that we built in order to ensure that humanity avoids the crimes committed during World War II.
Therefore, Brunei Darussalam.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the Commission of Inquiry for the presentation of its report. Brunei Darussalam strongly condemns the continued unlawful killings and the infliction of serious physical and mental harm upon the Palestinian people. We are particularly alarmed by ongoing settler violence aimed at forcibly displacing Palestinians from their homes and communities in the West Bank. Such actions constitute grave violations of international law. They deepen human suffering, heighten tensions, and undermine efforts to achieve a just and lasting peace in the region. In this regard, Brunei Darussalam calls for collective and meaningful action to ensure full accountability and for all crimes committed by the occupying power. In accordance with international law, we underscore the importance of sincere dialogue and diplomacy as a primary means to address conflict and to maintain regional peace, stability and prosperity. Impunity only perpetuates further violations. Mr. President, Brunei Darussalam affirms its unwavering support to the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including their right to self-determination and for their homeland, as well as the establishment of an independent and sovereign state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital and the admission of Palestine as a full member of the United Nations. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia.
السيد الرئيس، تعرب المملكة.
President, we express our grave concern regarding the content of the report about the ongoing grave violations of IHL and the international human rights law in the occupied Palestinian territory, and the repercussions of that in terms of humanitarian crisis for the brotherly Palestinian people, especially in Gaza. The Kingdom reiterates its condemnation of targeting civilians and civilian objects and starvation policies and restrictions on humanitarian access, and we reaffirm the importance of protecting civilians and ensuring safe and unhindered humanitarian access. The Kingdom reaffirms that the ongoing violations undermine the prospects for peace and stability in the region and require immediate action by the international community to ensure compliance with international law and the principle of accountability. We call for preserving the ceasefire agreement and alleviating the suffering of the people in Gaza, and undertaking the relevant policies to ensure the rights of the Palestinian people. Foremost of those rights is the establishment of an independent Palestinian state on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Sustainable and fair peace cannot be achieved by the ongoing occupation. It can only be achieved by ending occupation and respecting the resolutions of international legitimacy and UN resolutions. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the League of Arab States.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, President. The League of Arab States would like to thank the COI for the report, which documents yet again in great detail the systematic and ever-increasing trend of violence against the Palestinian people in the OPT, including East Jerusalem. The findings of the report affirm a 133% increase in the number of Palestinians killed by settlers in 2025 alone. This is in addition to systematic assaults on villages, farmlands, and homes that have been conducted in many cases by direct participation or stark collusion of the Israeli security forces. The report also documents grave violations against Palestinian children, including abductions and harm of all types, as well as recruitment in settler activity. The League of Arab States stresses that this violence is not incidental. It is part of a deliberate policy that aims to entrench the settlement project and to divide Palestinian land while undermining the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. The League of Arab States reaffirms the unlawfulness of all Israeli settlements by virtue of the ICJ's advisory opinion of July 2024. The League of Arab States calls upon this Council to ensure accountability for all violations documented in the report, and we call upon the international community to take all relevant practical procedures and concrete measures to ensure an end of the cycle of impunity and, more broadly, to end the illegal occupation. Thank you.
Representative of Libya.
Thank you. President, first of all, we would like to thank the COI for its report and what it includes of facts regarding to grave violations of human rights perpetrated by the occupying power in the OPT. We condemn the violence of settlers in the OPT supported by the occupation army. The COI has documented an increase by 133% of such attacks. The report has also reported the impunity, and that for the past 20 years, without a single charge, documentation is not sufficient, raising concern is not sufficient. Measures must be taken for accountability and for guaranteeing the rights of the Palestinian people in accordance with international legitimacy, including the decisions of the ICJ. This is a legal and moral obligation on the international community. We support all the rights of the Palestinian people, foremost amongst which the right to self-determination and establishment of an independent state with Jerusalem as its capital. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Somalia. Video statement.
Mr. President, Somalia aligns itself with the statements delivered by the Arab Group, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the Africa Group. Somalia thanks the Independent International Commission of Inquiry for its report and takes notes of its findings. We are deeply alarmed by the continued deterioration of the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip and strongly condemn the ongoing attacks against civilians, the destruction of civilian infrastructure, and the restrictions on humanitarian assistance. The ongoing developments in Gaza have resulted in immense suffering and an unacceptable loss of civilian life. Somalia reiterates that Israel, as the occupying power, bears clear responsibility under international law and must fully comply with the obligations under the international humanitarian law and international human rights law. The protections of civilians, humanitarian personnel, and essential civilian infrastructure must be ensured at all times. We call for full accountability for violations. Somalia reaffirms its steadfast support for the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people, including their inalienable rights to self-determination and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state on the basis of the 1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. I thank you.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar.
Sayyid al-Rais.
Mr. President, the State of Qatar strongly condemns the illegal Israeli decisions and measures in the occupied West Bank, including the reclassification of large swaths of Palestinian land as so-called Israeli state land, as well as the acceleration of settler activity in stark violation of international law and UN resolutions. We equally condemn measures and legislation that entrench occupation, as well as the enactment of the imposition of a death sentence law and the restrictions on the freedom of worship for Muslims and Christians, as well as attempts to alter the historical, demographic, and legal status quo in the occupied Al-Quds. The ongoing killing and displacement and violence against Palestinians in the absence of international accountability only exacerbates these violations and undermines the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people, foremost of which is the right to self-determination. Here we'd like to reaffirm that the conflicts and challenges that the world is witnessing today must not distract the international community from the serious situations and grave violations that are ongoing in the OPT. We call upon the international community to move urgently to put an end to the violations perpetrated against the brotherly Palestinian people and to end Israeli occupation and ensure accountability. Thank you, President.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Oman.
Thank you, President. The Sultanate of Oman associates with the statements delivered by the groups it belongs to. We have reviewed the report of the COI on the OPT, including East Jerusalem, and we express our deep concern regarding the rejection of the occupying power to all forms of cooperation with the COI. The report documents the ongoing systematic violations by settlers in the West Bank encouraged by Israeli authorities, and this includes terrorizing, displacement, bodily and sexual violence against civilians, as well as expropriation of private property and assaulting journalists and activists, as well as violating Muslim and Christian holy places. The Sultanate of Oman rejects categorically all attempts to entrench the settler project and to negate the presence of Palestinians, and any discourse that legitimizes the presence of occupation, which is in contravention to international law. All of the above is rejected by us. Such actions undermine a prospect for a sustainable and fair solution to the Palestinian cause. The Palestinians have been suffering for decades, and their inalienable right to establish their own state should not be undermined with East Jerusalem as the capital of an independent sovereign Palestinian state. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
Thank you, President. We take note of the report of the COI, and we reaffirm our strong condemnation of the genocide and grave violations faced by the Palestinian people in Gaza and the rest of the OPT at the hands of the occupying entity and the settler militias. The attacks of settlers against the Palestinian people come in the context of a systematic terror policy and genocide against the Palestinian people. We refer to what is said in the report about the occupying powers policy to expand settlements and to annex the West Bank. Tunisia calls on the international community to shoulder its responsibility in providing protection to the Palestinian people and to move immediately to stop genocide and all plans of forced displacement. The occupying power must abide by the advisory opinion of the ICJ on the illegality of occupation and the need to immediately dismantle settlements and implement the right of Palestinian people to self-determination. We reaffirm our stance in support of the rights of the Palestinian people. Thank you.
Floor to the distinguished representative of Namibia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Namibia aligns with the statement of the Africa Group. We welcome the report of the Commission of Inquiry on the OPT. Namibia is deeply concerned about the Commission's findings that settler violence against Palestinians increased 130% in 2025 alone. This includes violence perpetrated against Palestinian women and children. It should be pointed out that the ongoing settler violence enjoys the full backing of the Israeli government. To that effect, we echo the Commission's call on Israel to immediately seize the unlawful occupation of Palestinian territory and stop all new settler activities in accordance with the ICJ advisory opinion of July 2024, which affirmed the illegality of Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory. We also condemn in the strongest terms Israeli extraterritorial application of its national laws in the occupied Palestinian territory. In particular, we denounce Israel's death penalty for terrorist law passed in March 2026, which exclusively applies to Palestinians. To conclude, we reiterate our firm belief that the only viable solution to this conflict is a two-state solution with Palestine and Israel living side by side based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt.
Thank you, President. The delegation of Egypt expresses grave concern regarding the ongoing and systematic violations by Israel against the Palestinian people. And we condemn the illegal measures and activities, including settler violence, and attempts to impose a new administrative and legal status quo. This is in addition to acts by Israel that violate international law and undermine the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination, as well as undermining the regional and international efforts to de-escalate. We also reject the repeated attempts to change the demographic, historical, and legal character of Al-Quds al-Sharif, including acts breaching the inviolability of holy places and undermine the right to worship and belief. Accountability for these violations is not an option. It is a legal and moral obligation, and it is a prerequisite for achieving stability and peace in the region. And this should include ending the illegal occupation by Israel to OPT and ending settler activities and ensure that the Palestinian people get to enjoy their inalienable rights, including the right to self-determination and the establishment of an independent state on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Norway.
President, we thank the Commission of Inquiry for this report, which paints a grave picture of the extensive violence inflicted on civilians in Palestine. Settler violence has reached extreme levels. Palestinians are being killed, homes destroyed, and communities uprooted. The reported enabling of this violence by Israeli authorities is deeply concerning. The international community is alarmed that such brutality continues with impunity. Several countries, including Norway, are now implementing measures against extremist settlers. As occupying power, Israel is bound under international law to protect the Palestinian civilian population. It must bring an end to settler violence and ensure full accountability. The report also documents public punishments, torture, and unlawful killings executed by Hamas in Gaza. This terror regime is inflicting trauma on a population already deeply affected by war and humanitarian crisis. Norway thanks the COI for also addressing the notable increase in Israeli civilians killed and injured by Palestinian armed groups in 2023. President, Norway reaffirms our unwavering commitment to a comprehensive, just and lasting peace based on the two-state solution. How can this Council reinforce its efforts to address what seems to be a systematic erosion of human rights in Palestine, for which settler violence, the introduction of the death penalty in practice targeting just Palestinians, the mistreatment and lack of due process for Palestinian detainees in Israeli prisons are grave but not exclusive examples? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Thank you. Mr. President, South Africa welcomes the report of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel. We note with grave concern that the expansion of Israeli settlements continues despite the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion, and that settler violence against Palestinians, particularly women and children, persists. Palestinian children exposed to such violence suffer invisible harms, instilling daily fear and undermining their development and well-being. South Africa unequivocally condemns the use of sexual violence to instill fear and humiliate Palestinians. International law, including the Fourth Geneva Convention and human rights treaties, strictly prohibits sexual violence as a form of torture, cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment, and as a war crime. While Israeli authorities have acknowledged settler violence as a problem, structural conditions promoting impunity persist. Accountability for perpetrators remains elusive, and indoctrination of children in outposts perpetuates the cycle of violence. Efforts to remove violent settlers and dismantle outposts are noted, but more robust action is required. South Africa also condemns extrajudicial executions and severe violence inflicted on Palestinians in Gaza by armed militants affiliated with Hamas, including gender-based violence, and denounces acts committed by Palestinian armed groups in the occupied West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Israel. We concur with the Commission's conclusions that Israel's conduct breaches its obligations to protect Palestinians under the 4th Geneva Convention and international human rights law. South Africa reiterates its long-standing commitment to a two-state solution and calls for renewed efforts towards a just...
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Eritrea.
I thank you, Mr. President. The ongoing expansion of illegal settlements, the daily escalation of settler violence in the West Bank, and the severe ongoing humanitarian catastrophe in the Gaza Strip are direct results of an entrenched policy that denies a captive population their basic rights. As a nation that endured a bitter struggle for its own independence, Eritrea views the question of Palestine through the immutable lens of decolonization and the right of peoples to self-determination. Peace cannot be achieved through collective punishment. The enforcement of apartheid-like policies, the annihilation of an entire population, or the permanent displacement of Palestinians from their ancestral lands. While we took note of the report's focus on violations by all sides, the international community must not create a false equivalence. The primary legal obligation to end the violence rests with the occupying power. We reiterate that any lasting solution requires the immediate implementation of the International Courts of Justice advisory opinions, a total halt to settlement activities, and the end of the unlawful blockade of essential humanitarian relief. Eritrea reaffirms its unwavering solidarity with the Palestinian people. Real stability in the Middle East will remain elusive until this historic injustice is corrected through the establishment of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bangladesh.
Mr. President, Bangladesh thanks the Commission of Inquiry for its report and for its work under difficult and highly constrained circumstances. Bangladesh remains gravely concerned by the Commission's findings on killings and patterns of organized attacks, shootings, arson, intimidation, sexual violence, and child-targeted harms by the occupying power in the occupied Palestinian territory. We are particularly concerned by the Commission's conclusion that settler violence functions as an instrument of annexation, serving to entrench settlements and displace Palestinians from their land. Bangladesh reiterates that the occupation, continued settlement expansion, and the denial of Palestinian people's inalienable right to self-determination remain at the root of the crisis. Israel, the occupying power, must comply fully with the international humanitarian law and international human rights law. And the unlawful occupation cease all settlement activities and protect civilians and ensure accountability. We call for full cooperation with the international accountability mechanisms, including the ICC, and urge all states to refrain from aiding or abetting violations of international law. Finally, Bangladesh reaffirms its unwavering support for the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people and for an end to Israel's occupation. A just and lasting peace can only be achieved through the establishment of a sovereign and independent state of Palestine along the pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Peru.
President, Peru would like to thank the Independent International Commission of Inquiry for the submission of the report. We take note with concern of its findings on the violations of international human rights law in the occupied Palestinian territory. In particular, acts of forced displacement of the civilian population, particularly in Gaza, and building new settlements which are contrary to international law. Peru would restate that all parties must fully respect their international obligations, and that the protection of the civilian population without any distinction must be an absolute priority. To conclude, President, Peru would restate its commitment to the unrestricted respect for international law and with a two-state solution whereby both are living in peace and security within the internationally recognized borders. Many thanks.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brazil.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We welcome the report of the Commission of Inquiry, an important contribution to accountability that exposes the structural patterns of violence by Israeli settlers and other non-state actors. Brazil is deeply concerned by the unprecedented surge in Israeli settler terror in 2026, which has already left 13 Palestinians dead and nearly 500 injured. Carried out with full impunity, this systematic violence and resulting forcible displacement threaten the very survival of Palestinian communities on their land and risk facilitating ethnic cleansing. It is profoundly alarming that Israel's security forces shield settler violence instead of protecting the occupied population. Brazil reminds Israel of its obligations under the Geneva Conventions to safeguard Palestinians as protected persons. We urge the Israeli government to take immediate, effective measures to protect Palestinian civilians, especially children. Brazil reiterates its strong support for the Commission and calls on Israel to grant it unhindered access to fulfill its mandate. We remain committed to a two-state solution within an independent and viable state of Palestine living side by side with Israel in peace and security within the 1967 borders. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the Commission of Inquiry for its presentation and report. Turkey remains gravely concerned by the findings in the report. The increase in illegal settlements, the surge in settler terror, and Israel's attempts to create fait accompli at the Muslim and Christian holy sites scuttle all peace efforts. In Gaza, there are continuous Israeli violations. The humanitarian situation calls for immediate, unrestricted access and launching of recovery and reconstruction efforts. Urgent measures are needed to protect the civilians. We also categorically reject Israeli attempts towards annexation and occupation in Lebanon. Israel's continuous attacks risk unraveling Lebanese security and stability. Mr. President, Israeli policies have become the main cause of regional insecurity. At the root of the problem is the strategy of Israel to ensure its security at the expense of and not in conjunction with the security and stability of its neighbors and the region. At the core lie the illegal occupation of Palestinian territories. The cure remains the two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as the capital of the State of Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein.
President, Liechtenstein thanks the Commission of Inquiry for the presentation of its report and for its continued work. The report confronts us with a sobering reality. Palestinian civilians find themselves trapped between two sources of grave harm. In Gaza, Palestinian civilians face severe violence at the hands of Hamas, while Israeli military operations continue. The humanitarian situation remains dire, and safe, rapid, and unimpeded access for humanitarian actors and aid must be ensured. In the West Bank, Palestinians are subject to extremist settler violence, with increased killings of civilians, including women and children, rising to deeply disturbing levels, and in contravention of Israel's obligation under international law. At the same time, Israeli civilians have likewise been subjected to killings and grave bodily harm by Hamas. Mr. President, the adoption of a discriminatory death penalty bill marks a grave regression from Israel's own commitments. Liechtenstein rejects death penalty in any circumstance. In the long run, the realization of the Palestinian right to self-determination and a two-state solution is the only viable way for a peaceful, stable, and sustainable solution for the region, and we call on all parties to resume credible political deliberations to this end. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the UK.
Thank you, Mr. President. We continue to regret that the Commission of Inquiry was established on an open-ended basis. Nevertheless, the UK remains committed to upholding human rights and recognises the value of proportionate scrutiny of allegations of violations and abuses by all parties in Israel and Palestine. The humanitarian situation in Gaza remains intolerable. Urgent action is needed to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian assistance. All parties must comply with the IHL, including on the protection of civilians and humanitarian personnel and the principle of distinction. We are also deeply concerned by the deteriorating situation in the West Bank, including continued settler violence, illegal settlement expansion, and ongoing demolitions and displacement. the UK has taken action, including through sanctions and guidance to UK businesses to deter and counter support for illegal settlements and those responsible for related violence. The UK continues to support efforts to restore and sustain a ceasefire, including the disarmament of Hamas and an end to its control of Gaza, and a return to a credible political process toward a two-state solution, delivering lasting peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians alike. What steps does the Commission see as most effective in advancing accountability and addressing the drivers of violence? Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Portugal.
Portugal thanks the Commission of Inquiry for its report and expresses grave concern regarding its findings. Amid continued violence and forced displacement, civilians are left in increasingly precarious conditions and exposed to human rights violations. We are particularly alarmed by the reported escalation of settler violence in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, marked by attacks that have further deepened insecurity and fear among Palestinian people. All parties are bound by international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Israel, as the occupying power, is under the obligation to ensure the protection of the occupied population, as reaffirmed by an International Court of Justice. Portugal views with particular concern the adoption of the death penalty bill by Israel, an acceptable form of punishment that undermines the inherent dignity of human life with reported discriminatory implications. Portugal calls for the full implementation of the ceasefire by all parties and remains firmly committed to a comprehensive, just and lasting peace based on the two-state solution, while urging all parties to refrain from unilateral actions that could undermine peace efforts. Distinguished members of the Commission, could you further reflect on how the immediate harm caused by settler violence may translate into long-term psychological impacts on children? I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Sayyid Rais.
Mr. President, the situation in the OPT are of grave concern, considering the increase in attacks by extremist settlers against the Palestinians. We condemn the illegal measures that directly undermine the two-state solution. We reiterate our refusal of any measures that aim at annexation, including a systematic expansion of settlements and imposing what's called Israeli sovereignty, and establishing an infrastructure that aim at changing the demographic and territorial changes. Our stance is clear. Any kind of annexation is a breach of international law. In conclusion, we reaffirm our commitment to support any effort aimed at achieving a comprehensive peace on the basis of the two-state solution, to end the cycle of violence and to establish a sovereign Palestinian state living side by side with Israel in peace and security. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belgium.
Thank you, President. Belgium welcomes the focus of the Commission's timely report. We express grave concern at the finding that severe physical and psychological harm, including killings perpetrated against civilians by violent Israeli settlers and Palestinian armed groups such as Hamas, is on the rise. These criminal acts and the pervasive impunity surrounding them must cease immediately. We call on all parties to collaborate with the Commission and other relevant UN entities and the ICC in this regard. Full respect of international law is also required with regard to the situation in the OPT itself, in line with the ICJ advisory opinion. In the meantime, Belgium and the EU have imposed additional targeted sanctions against violent settlers in the West Bank and against Hamas leaders. In our national capacity, we have also declared Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, as well as the political and military leaders of Hamas, persona non grata. Belgium also decided to expand its current prohibition of arms export. Belgium remains firmly committed to a two-state solution, the only viable path for Israelis and Palestinians to live side by side in lasting peace, security and dignity. We therefore call for full respect of the ceasefire and effective implementation of Resolution 2803, including the disarmament of Hamas and the withdrawal of Israeli military forces from Gaza. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the Commission of Inquiry for its work. 3 points from our side. First, on Gaza. Germany reiterates its condemnation of Hamas's terrorist attacks and calls for the permanent disarmament of Hamas and other non-state armed groups. Germany calls on Israel to ensure that sufficient aid reaches civilians in Gaza and that the rehabilitation of humanitarian infrastructure starts immediately. Second, regarding the West Bank, Germany reiterates its call on Israel to end expansion of settlements and administrative powers, prevent and ensure accountability for unprecedented levels of settler violence, as well as to investigate allegations against Israeli forces, including in detention facilities. We strongly oppose any calls for annexation and forcible displacement of the Palestinian population and reaffirm our commitment to a lasting peace based on a negotiated two-state solution. Third, on Lebanon, we call on all parties to respect humanitarian law, ensure the protection of civilians, and return to the agreed-upon ceasefire and work towards a lasting peace. In closing, we welcome the announcement of an agreement between the United States and Iran. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mauritania.
السيد الرئيس تتقدم موريتانيا بالشكر.
Thank you. President Mauritania would like to thank the Commission of Inquiry for the submission of its report. We have looked very carefully at the findings of this report, particularly reference to the escalating violence on the part of settlers in the West Bank, including in East Jerusalem, and the impact that it has on Palestinian civilians. It also shows that these attacks are not isolated incidents, but are part and parcel of a policy, a colonial expansionist policy, forced displacement, depriving Palestinians of their right to self-determination. We also condemn all practices in the report which are serious violations of humanitarian and international human rights law. A serious approach needs to be mindful of the causes of this state of affairs, namely the maintenance of Israel's occupation and the illegal expansionist approach. We need accountability and recall our principled position supporting the Palestinian people, including their right to establishing their own sovereign state on the basis of the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as a capital in line with the relevant resolutions.
Representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of Korea thanks the Commission of Inquiry for its report and takes note of its findings. We remain deeply concerned by the continued deterioration of the human rights and humanitarian situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, including increasing violence in the West Bank and the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, which requires sustained international attention amid ongoing tensions across the Middle East. The Commission's findings regarding the sharp increase in settler violence in the West Bank are deeply troubling. We call on Israel to reverse its decisions related to settlement expansion and take effective measures to prevent and address settler violence. We also note with concern the Commission's findings concerning executions, torture, and other abuses committed by Palestinian armed groups in Gaza, as well as killings and attacks against Israeli civilians by Palestinian armed groups and individuals. All parties must fully comply with their obligations under international law, and we hope that further progress in the implementation of the ceasefire agreement will contribute to improving the situation. The Republic of Korea reaffirms committed to the two-state solution and will continue to support efforts aimed at alleviating civilian sufferings and restoring peace and stability in the region. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Venezuela.
Thank you, President. Regrettably, We yet again listen to a report which testifies to the worsening situation of human rights imposed by Israel against the civilians in Palestine. Despite the ceasefire, there is still violence. We're seeing an increase in murders, forced displacement, people who are detained without trial, people who have been abducted, disappeared persons, a population which is constantly suffering as if they weren't entitled to the right to life, incalculable harm done to the civilian infrastructure, health centres, schools, etc. The acts of violence increase in plain view of the international community. We are seeing a dangerous normalisation of this violation of international humanitarian law and the UN Charter. Yet again, we demand a ceasefire. It's vital that we guarantee the protection of human rights as well as the integrity of the Palestinian people given this terrible criminal siege. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Yemen.
السيد الرئيس اطلعت بلادي على ما ورد في تقرير لجنة.
President, we studied the report of the Commission of Inquiry and we strongly condemn the violations committed against the Palestinian people, especially the targeting of civilians, the large-scale destructions, and also the forced displacement, as well as other practices that lead to an unprecedented level of suffering. All of this is happening without any accountability and leads to impunity. This is why we recall the importance to support the mandate of the Commission of Inquiry and the need to establish truth and facts and recall the importance of accountability. We call upon the International Court to take the relevant measures to guarantee the protection of civilians and guarantee the respect of international law and guarantee Palestinian rights to enjoy their legitimate rights, especially the right to self-determination.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iran.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, President. We thank the COI for its important report. While accountability for all violations is essential, we reject any narrative that equates perpetrators of grave international crimes with the population subjected to systematic oppression or people exercising their right to resist. We further draw the attention of the Commission and the Council to the extension of the same pattern of conduct to southern Lebanon. The systematic destruction of civilian homes, agricultural lands, water infrastructure, and essential services, coupled with the measures preventing the return of predominantly Shia communities, constitute the deliberate infliction of the conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction of the protected group in whole or in part within the meaning of Article 2C of Geneva's Genocide Convention. Therefore, the specific intent, dolus specialis, to destroy the Shia community as a protected group is established and confirming the criminal pattern of Israeli regime's senior official under Article 6, 7.1d and 7.1h of the Rome Statute. While the Commission's mandate currently focuses on the OPT, the prevention of the further ethnic cleansing in Lebanon necessitates either the establishment of similar mechanism or extension of the Commission's mandate in line with the preventive objective of paragraph 1 of HRC Resolution 830/1. I thank you, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon.
Mr. Chair, Lebanon commends the Commission of Inquiry's sustained efforts to document and preserve the factual records of violations. We express our full solidarity with the Palestinians and the hardships they endure. We also thank states, United Nations entities and humanitarian partners that provide vital assistance under extremely difficult circumstances. Year after year, report after report, however, the situation remains unchanged. Israel's continued occupation, settlers' violence, expansion of illegal settlements, widespread destruction and displacement. Palestinians continue to face a broad and persistent pattern of violations of international humanitarian and human rights law that affects every aspect of civilian life. These practices undermine the right of Palestinians to self-determination and further erode prospects for political solutions. The principles of international law are clear. The challenge facing the international community is no longer to identify violations, but to ensure Israel's full compliance with international obligations and the implementation of recommendations issued by international accountability mechanisms. The continued failure to seize these violations and to hold perpetrators accountable allowed Israel to persist in attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructures, acts of destruction, forced displacement, and disregard for international law. The same patterns have extended beyond the occupied Palestinian territory and have directly impacted and targeted Lebanon.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Netherlands.
Mr. President, the Kingdom of the Netherlands aligns itself with the EU statement. We thank the members of the Commission of Inquiry for their presentation and take note of the report on killings and acts causing bodily and mental harm to non-state actors in the occupied Palestinian territory and Israel. The report of the Commission of Inquiry paints a disheartening picture of the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory. Regarding Gaza, the Kingdom of the Netherlands reiterates its call for the full implementation by all parties of the ceasefire and all other provisions of Security Council Resolution 2803. Hamas and other non-state armed groups must disarm. Innocent civilians have become victims of violence and executions by these groups. This is unacceptable, and the Kingdom of the Netherlands continues to look for ways to sanction those involved. We reiterate that Hamas and other non-state armed groups cannot play a role in the future governance of Gaza. The report also demonstrates that settler violence in the West Bank has become an everyday reality. Settlements and their expansion contravene international law. We call therefore on Israel to end its expansion of settlements, ensure accountability for settler violence, including to investigate allegations against Israeli forces. The Kingdom of the Netherlands continues to work on sanctions against violent settlers. We oppose those who argue for annexation and forcible displacement of the Palestinian population. I thank you.
Thank you. This was the last speaker that we could accommodate. We will now turn to our list of speakers for national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. And I give the floor to the representative of the Jerusalem Institute of Justice.
Mr. President, we address this Council today with grave concern over the bias and methodological distortions in the Commission of Inquiry's latest report. While acknowledging the October 7 massacre and the suffering of the hostages, it treats these atrocities as footnotes. The report rightly admits that Hamas and affiliated armed groups tortured civilians, punished suspected opponents without trial, and used hospitals for coercion and abuse. These findings expose Hamas not as a resistance movement, but as a brutal authority terrorizing Israelis and Palestinians alike. Yet, even when Hamas executes Palestinians, punishes children, and weaponizes hospitals, the report finds a path back to Israel. It recasts Hamas's brutality as the product of a so-called vacuum created by Israeli actions. That premise is flawed and morally inverted. Hamas has ruled Gaza through fear and torture since 2007, as the report itself acknowledges. The pattern is unmistakable here. Hamas abuses Palestinians and terrorizes Gaza from within, yet Israel is blamed. That is not serious legal analysis. It is political framing disguised as human rights reporting, claiming to hold a terrorist organization accountable. A credible mechanism must distinguish between a sovereign democracy defending its own people and a terrorist organization committed to its destruction. We urge this Council to reject this narrative and demand factual rigor, legal precision, and moral clarity. Thank you.
I now give the floor to the Defense for Children International.
Mr. President, we draw your urgent attention to the widespread detention of Palestinian children without charge or trial. Month after month, the population and proportion of Palestinian child detainees in administrative detention is growing to all-time high record levels. Israeli Prison Service records for 2026 confirm that at least 350 Palestinian children are currently detained in Israeli prisons, with more than half held under administrative detention orders, meaning detention without charge. These children are detained indefinitely based on secret files, and their arbitrary detention is frequently renewed at the last minute, a deliberate practice that inflicts severe psychological torture. Detention centres have been largely isolated from the outside world as Israeli forces block access to the International Committee of the Red Cross, human rights organizations, lawyers, and families. Detainees' health deteriorates due to the policy of deliberate starvation, severe overcrowding, and gross medical neglect. These practices constitute a flagrant violation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Convention Against Torture, perpetrated with complete international impunity. We strongly urge all member states to demand the immediate release of all Palestinian children in Israeli detention centers, military bases, and prisons. Demand unrestricted access for lawyers and human rights organizations to meet with child prisoners, and call to reverse the Israeli instituted suspension of family visits. And use all available means to demand Israeli authorities uphold Palestinian children's rights as outlined in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which the State of Israel has ratified.
I now give the floor to Isaac International.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ISAC is a youth-led organization built on the belief that every young person deserves the opportunity to develop their potential and shape a better future. But in Palestine today, that future is being destroyed. No child can learn under bombardments. No student can dream while schools are damaged, universities are closed, and families are forced to search for safety, food, and water. Education is not a privilege, it is a fundamental right. And when education is denied, an entire generation is denied the chance to rebuild, to lead, and to live with dignity. This crisis is a humanitarian tragedy and a direct attack on every promises of the Sustainable Development Goals. None of these goals can survive in a context of violence, displacement, starvation, and fear. As young people, we refuse to accept a world where a child's access to education depends on where they are born. We refuse to normalize hunger. We refuse to accept poverty, occupation, and insecurity as the destiny of any people. ISAC calls for the protection of civilians, unrestricted humanitarian access, the protection of schools and universities, and a renewed commitment to peace, dignity, and human rights. Young people in Palestine, as everywhere, have a right to learn, to live free from hunger and poverty, and to build a better future with peace and dignity. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to the Palestinian Initiative for the Promotion of Global Dialogue and Democracy.
Mr. High Commissioner, distinguished members of the Council, we thank the Independent Commission of Inquiry for its continued work and welcome this report examination of violence perpetrated by settlers in the occupied Palestinian territory. We particularly welcome the Commissioner's documentation and recognition of escalating settlers' violence, which cannot be viewed in isolation of the broader context of settlement expansion, displacement, and fragmentation of Palestinian communities. The situation in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, reflects an accelerating Israeli-sanctioned pattern of territorial fragmentation and de facto annexation. Settlement expansion, movement restrictions, and coercive practices deepen dispossession and undermine the territorial contiguity of the OPT. Settlers' violence is not isolated but enabled by these policies, which also undermine accountability and contribute to the persistence of violations against Palestinians, including administrative detention without charge or trial against women, children, and students in degrading conditions. In Gaza, the scale of destruction has resulted in catastrophic humanitarian conditions, including the collapse of health system and severe reproductive harm. Mr. High Commissioner, these patterns underscore the need to move beyond documentation toward accountability. We call for sustained international monitoring, independent investigation, and measures to ensure compliance with international humanitarian and human rights law, including attention to gender harms. Thank you.
I give the floor to the Palestinian Return Center.
The Palestinian Return Center thanks the High Commissioner for his report. Further to the High Commissioner's findings, we wanted to highlight increased settler violence in the Palestinian Governorate of Jenin, an area within the West Bank that falls under Area A of the Oslo Accord, legally recognizing it as Palestinian land. In February 2026, Israeli authorities confiscated over 26,000 dunams of land in Jenin under Military Order 26/15, demolishing 14 residential structures, seizing 46 properties with a documented 43 settler attacks. In April 2026, the Higher Planning Council of the Israeli Civil Administration approved 126 new illegal settler housing units in Sanur, an area within the northern Palestinian region of the West Bank, which was formally evacuated under the disengagement plan in 2005. Israeli official Smotrich publicly declared that the settlement of Sanur would become an inseparable part of the map of Jewish settlements, and that is just the beginning. Statements of direct intent to continue the illegal seizures of Palestinian lands to render the very foundations of a viable Palestinian state impossible. We urge member states to investigate and prosecute under domestic or universal jurisdiction individuals and organizations that are suspected of violence against Palestinians and the expanding settlement enterprise.
I give the floor to the representative of Al-Haq, Law in the Service of Man.
Mr. President, the deeply alarming pattern of settler violence we are witnessing must be understood as a means and method of implementing Israel's Zionist goal of Palestinian erasure. Since the beginning of 2026, nearly 1,500 attacks have been documented, targeting individuals, homes, agricultural land, and livelihoods. Organized groups of armed settlers, expanding their illegal presence in Palestine in direct defiance of the ICJ's July 2024 advisory opinion, are employing lethal force and aggressive intimidation tactics, often targeting entire communities. Illegal outposts, once a tool of land control and appropriation, have evolved into operational hubs for attacks. Incidents that begin as property seizures, such as livestock theft, now frequently lead to the fatal injury and killing of Palestinians. Serving as a tool of territorial consolidation that entrenches apartheid, these acts drive mass forcible displacement, especially of pastoral and Bedouin communities. The scale, organisation and persistence of this violence and its clear facilitation by the state further attest to its role in advancing Israel's annexation of Palestine and destruction of its people. The consequences of systematically targeting, dispossessing and depriving Palestinians of their means of survival are not only humanitarian, they're existential. Before our eyes, Palestinians endure an ongoing genocide met with global complicity. Meaningful international action is both overdue and urgently required. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the European Centre for Law and Justice.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Commission of Inquiry cannot continue to willfully ignore the overwhelming evidence supporting and documenting the vast sexual atrocities committed by Hamas and other terrorists in Gaza on October 7th and beyond. Not only were these crimes documented and widely reported in the media and even in a UN mission report, but a recent report by an independent nonprofit gives detailed documentation and evidence of the same, concluding that the attack was a coordinated assault in which sexual violence was used to terrorize victims, families, communities, and society at large, and that sexual and gender-based violence formed a central component of the October 7th attack and of the hostages in captivity. Despite the abundance of credible evidence, the Commission has chosen to disregard these findings, apparently because they conflict with its predetermined narrative. The sheer weight of documented proof now compels the Commission to rectify its prior reports, which unjustly condemned Israel, and to issue accurate, evidence-based findings on sexual and gender-based violence. The Commission's mandate requires it to investigate all alleged violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law by limiting its investigative focus to only certain actors and categories of undocumented violations. The Commission has acted beyond its authority and in violation of the independence, impartiality, and objectivity required of its members. Thank you.
I now give the floor to the Institute for NGO Research.
Thank you, Mr. President. It appears that the COI is finally willing to address at least some, though most remain largely ignored, of the atrocities committed by Hamas against the Palestinian people. Yet, despite its mandate, and despite the fact that it has been granted millions of taxpayer dollars to examine the root causes of the Palestinian conflict, this commission still refuses to address the elephant in the room: the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. The IRGC is the primary entity driving conflict in the Middle East, and in particular the Palestinian conflict with Israel. It has exported its millenary and genocidal ideology to Palestinian armed groups. The IRGC finances and trains Hamas combatants and disseminates its terror propaganda across the globe as part of its foreign influence ops, allowing the terrorist organization to entrench its occupation of Gaza and to commit atrocities not only against Israelis, but also Palestinians. Mr. President, Why does the COI refuse to examine the role of Iran and the ruling IRGC? Why does it refuse to document its incitement of and acts of genocide? Why does it not call for boycotts and sanctions against IRGC entities and officials? Why does it not call for referral of IRGC leaders to the ICC? Why is it refusing to spend any of its vast resources to investigate the real root causes of this conflict? Thank you.
I now give the floor to the representative of the internationallawyers.org.
We thank the Commission for its report. The Commission's findings highlight Israel's failure as the occupying power to fulfill its obligations under the Fourth Geneva Convention and customary international law to protect the Palestinian population and safeguard their right to life amidst genocide. As the Commission finds, settler violence in the West Bank functions as a means of implementing Israeli state policy aimed at displacing Palestinians and facilitating the annexation of territory. Israeli security forces have acted as a shield for violence, accompanying and protecting settlers during attacks against Palestinian civilians. Furthermore, Palestinians are systematically labeled as terrorists to justify the use of deadly force against them. Israel's law and institutions are insufficient to deter settler violence. Widespread impunity driven by police inaction and defiances within the justice system enables settler attacks. While settlers often face little to no accountability, Palestinians are subject to harsher treatment and a discriminatory legal system, further perpetuating inequality and violence. Accordingly, internationallawyers.org demands the end of the unlawful occupation, urges immediate measures to ensure the protection of the Palestinian people, calls on the international community to refrain from aiding or assisting this illegal situation, and urges the Commission to recognize that Israel's settler actions constitute acts contributing to the genocide being committed by Israel. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom.
We thank the Commission of Inquiry for its report. Yet the genocide in Gaza continues, and atrocities against Palestinians remain normalized. Among these atrocities is sexual violence in occupied Palestine, used as a deliberate strategy of settler colonial domination. Survivors report forced nudity, sexualized threats, invasive touching, and physical assault by the Israeli military, police, and settlers. As the Commission stated, settlers have increasingly resorted to sexual violence to instill fear and humiliate Palestinian families and human rights defenders. Men, women, and children are targeted. Israeli soldiers and guards, including women, have been documented as perpetrators. This reflects a regime of bodily and reproductive injustice in which Palestinian bodies are treated as sites of punishment across checkpoints, prisons, and homes. Yet, international mechanisms often seek to validate testimonies through the very institutions accused of these harms, further silencing survivors. WILF demands recognition of this violence as an expression of settler colonialism. We call for accountability and for support to Palestinian-led documentation efforts. Justice requires dismantling the system that protects colonial legitimacy. We must move beyond criminal frameworks towards holistic approaches that restore dignity to those whose bodies have been turned into battlegrounds.
This was the last speaker we could accommodate for this dialogue. I now give the floor to the members of the Commission for the concluding remarks. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, I wish to thank each of the states as well as the non-government organizations that have offered valuable comments on the report of this Commission. I wish to reiterate the commitment of this Commission to adopting the highest standards in terms of gathering of evidence, analysis of evidence, using scientific standards, acceptable to the known adjudicatory bodies, the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. Having said that, I would like to reiterate that Israel should permit this Commission to the territories, to access the territories, and to speak to the victims of violence so that we can have a first-hand account of all victims of all forms of violence. This commission is working to ensure justice to all the victims, irrespective of their nationalities or the territories they belong to in these areas. So I request the State of Israel to cooperate with this commission to carry out its mandate. I now pass the floor to Justice Mumba, my co-commissioner.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you, Chair, for this opportunity. We thank all member states and all groups who have made their statements supporting the Commission's work and challenging it in some state. While the Commission of Inquiry has a mandate, a specific mandate, to handle the atrocities that are happening in the occupied Palestinian territory, we also feel that member states have obligations. The report has been disseminated. The decision of the International Court of Justice has also been disseminated and is well understood, as cited by most of the contributing states on this fora. What is remaining is really action to deal with the perpetrators, non-state actors, Palestinian armed groups, Hamas and the Israeli forces, and institutions that are perpetrating violence in the occupied Palestinian territory. There are international instruments which oblige states to take action. Some states have mentioned about regarding sanctions against named personnel perpetrating violence and atrocities in these countries. And also, when we talk about sanctions, it's not only about against individuals, but also against the international companies that are supporting the perpetrators of violence in this region, and also institutions which operate from Israel or from other countries supporting indirectly or directly these atrocities. We maintain that the Commission is committed to its mandate and to investigate as far as possible, but we also recognize that we have constraints and challenges in terms of time, resources, and requisite personnel to continue with these investigations and to make it clear that our mandate is doable given positive support from all member states and all those that are concerned with these deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you. A number of states in commenting asked questions, and the common theme in most of those questions was what more can be done. Ireland said, what steps can states take? Indonesia said, how can we strengthen accountability principles? New Zealand said, what more can the international community do? The United Kingdom said, what steps can be taken for countering impunity? Our Commission has now released 16 reports. We'll be releasing our 17th next week, dealing with the situation of children. And all of our reports make recommendations. We must move beyond expressing deep concern and strong condemnation to addressing the questions that these states have asked today. What more can be done? Many states referred to positive actions that have been taken, sanctions on individuals. What more can be done is to start targeting institutions, not just settlers, but settlements themselves, to prevent the transfer of financial assistance, whether through trade or donations. Many states are still allowing tax deductibility for local organisations that make direct or indirect financial contributions to settlements. Accountability is not about the leaders alone. Malaysia raised the question of dual citizens. Anyone who has served in the Israeli Defence Forces in Gaza since October 2023 must be considered a suspect for the commission of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of genocide. The issue of accountability extends beyond warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. And speaking of that court, what has been done to support the court while it is under attack from the United States? What has been done to support the Special Rapporteur? The attention now must move beyond concern and condemnation to action.
I thank the members of the Commission of Inquiry. This brings us to the end of this interactive dialogue. I wish to thank the members once again for their participation and their contribution. We will now take a short break before holding the interactive dialogue on the annual report of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights.